On the outskirts of a forgotten town, hidden deep within a dense, ancient forest, stood the Whispering House. Its decaying structure loomed over the landscape like a dark secret. No one knew how long the house had been there, nor who had built it, but the town was filled with chilling stories of those who had entered and never returned. For years, people whispered about strange lights seen flickering through the cracked windows and shadowy figures moving within. But what unsettled the townsfolk the most were the voices. Late at night, those who lived closest to the woods could hear faint whispers carried on the wind, disembodied voices calling out for help, crying, or simply laughing in the dead of night. Anna, a young journalist fresh out of university, had come to this remote town for one purpose: to unravel the mystery of the Whispering House. Determined to break the story and make a name for herself, she ignored all warnings. Armed with her camera and flashlight, she ventured into the forest on a stormy night, the wind howling like tortured souls. The trees seemed to close in on her as she approached the house. Every step forward felt heavier, the shadows around her growing longer, more oppressive. When she reached the front door, it swung open on its own, the sound echoing like a scream in the night. Her flashlight flickered as she crossed the threshold, stepping into the house's suffocating darkness. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of decay and mildew. The house felt alive, breathing, as if it were watching her. Old, rotting furniture was draped in cobwebs, and the wallpaper was peeling away to reveal strange symbols scratched into the walls. Portraits of long-forgotten residents lined the halls, each face pale, eyes hollow, mouths twisted into unsettling smiles. Suddenly, Anna heard it, a faint whisper. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was soft but chilling, sending a shiver down her spine. She whipped her flashlight around, but there was no one. The beam of light trembled in her hand, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance across the walls. As she ventured deeper into the house, the whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if something or someone was trying to communicate. The house felt impossibly vast, with hallways that stretched into darkness and staircases that led nowhere. The further she went, the more the house seemed to twist and warp, as though the walls were shifting behind her, closing her in. Then came the footsteps. They started softly, barely perceptible, but soon grew louder, heavy, deliberate, and echoing from the floor above. Anna's heart raced as she turned a corner and saw a figure standing at the top of the stairs. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long, its head tilted at an impossible angle, and its hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. The figure didn't move. It just stood there watching. Anna's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, and in that instant the figure was gone. Panic gripped her, but she forced herself to keep moving. Her camera had gone haywire, the screen flickering with static. Her flashlight was dimming, and the whispers were now a cacophony of voices, pleading, crying, laughing. "Join us! Join us!" they chanted. She stumbled into a room at the end of a long, narrow corridor. The temperature dropped sharply, her breath visible in the frigid air. In the center of the room stood a grand mirror, its surface fogged over. Something compelled her to approach it, as if an invisible force was drawing her in. As she wiped away the condensation, her reflection slowly came into view, but it wasn't her. The figure staring back at her was a grotesque version of herself, skin stretched tight over bone, eyes sunken and lifeless. The reflection smiled, a slow, unnatural grin that spread across its face like a crack. Then it whispered in her own voice, "You're already home." The door behind her slammed shut with a deafening crash. Anna spun around, her flashlight flickering one last time before plunging her into complete darkness. The room was pitch black, the only sound the erratic beating of her heart. And then from the corner of the room came a low, guttural growl. Something was there with her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. She reached for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through her as the footsteps grew closer, now accompanied by labored, raspy breathing. She could feel it, something cold and damp brushing against her arm. Anna screamed and slammed her fists against the door, but there was no escape. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, surrounding her, filling her mind. "You'll never leave. You belong to the house now," they hissed in unison. The icy grip of unseen hands wrapped around her throat, squeezing tighter and tighter as the growling grew deafening. And then silence. The door swung open on its own, slowly like an invitation. Anna gasped for breath, trembling as she stumbled out of the room and back into the hallway. She didn't know how she escaped, but something felt different. The whispers were still there, but quieter now, almost welcoming. Anna hurried out of the house and into the forest, barely able to process what had happened. But as she reached the edge of the woods, she stopped. Something pulled at her thoughts, a strange feeling she couldn't shake. When she looked down, her heart skipped a beat. The skin on her hands was pale, too pale. Her fingers, once warm and lively, now appeared thin, almost skeletal. She quickly pulled out her phone, the screen flickering as she switched it to the camera. But the reflection staring back at her wasn't her own. It was the figure from the mirror. Her face was distorted, hollow, a twisted version of what she once was. She dropped the phone in horror, her pulse racing as realization dawned on her. The house hadn't let her go, it had become her. Or, rather, she had become the house. Behind her, the mansion stood still and silent, but she knew she could never leave. Not really. The house had taken her, claimed her. She was now part of it forever. In the weeks that followed, locals started hearing the whispers again, stronger this time. And when curious onlookers ventured too close, they swore they saw a pale figure standing at the window watching them. A figure with hollow eyes and a twisted smile. Anna had become the newest whisper in the house, calling out to those who dared to listen, drawing them in, just as it had drawn her. The house had always been hungry, and now it had a new voice. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, and share for more interesting stories.